Good morning. Welcome to the September 2021 open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission on the very last day of September, but right in the middle of Hispanic Heritage Month. Madam Secretary, would you please introduce our agenda this morning?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 7 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking to examine the Wireless Network Resiliency Cooperative Framework, the FCC's network outage reporting rules, and strategies to address the effect of power outages on communications networks. Second, you will consider an order on reconsideration that would vacate the 2026 report and order, which adopted a state-by-state leasing framework for the 4.9 gigahertz band. The Commission will also consider an 8th further notice of proposed rulemaking that would seek comment on a nationwide framework for the 4.9 gigahertz band, ways to foster greater public safety use, and ways to facilitate compatible non-public safety access to the band. Third, you will consider a further notice of proposed rulemaking to update the Commission's rules regarding the implementation of the Public Safety Answering Point, or PSAP, do not call registry in order to protect PSAPs from unwanted robocalls. Fourth, you will consider a further notice of proposed rulemaking that proposes to impose obligations on gateway providers to help stop illegal robocalls originating abroad from reaching U.S. consumers and businesses. Fifth, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that proposes to update sections 54.500 and 54.501B1 of the Commission's rules to clarify tribal libraries are eligible for support through the E-rate program. Sixth, you will consider a report and order that would adopt standard questions, a baseline set of national security and law enforcement questions that certain applicants with reportable foreign ownership must provide to the executive branch prior to or at the same time they file their applications with the Commission, thus expediting the executive branch's review for national security and law enforcement concerns. Seventh, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking to address SIM swapping and port out fraud. Please note item 3, authorizing 6 gigahertz band automated frequency coordination systems, revisions to political programming and record keeping rules, and item 4, review of the Commission's Part 95 personal radio services, both listed on the Commission's September 23rd Sunshine Notice, have been adopted by the Commission and deleted from today's agenda. The first item on your agenda is entitled Promoting More Resilient Networks and will be presented by the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, and Lisa Folks, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Ms. Folks, please proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel and Commissioners. As Hurricane Ida has shown us once again, natural disasters continue to disrupt the nation's communications networks when we most need to communicate. These outages can prevent us from reaching 911 and receiving life-saving emergency information. We have seen this during recent hurricane seasons, wildfires in California, earthquakes in Puerto Rico, and severe winter storms in Texas, among other incidents. While service providers have made some improvements, more can be done to ensure that communications remain available for both the public and first responders when disasters strike. This notice of proposed rulemaking we present today takes a comprehensive approach toward doing just that. With me today from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau is Saswat Misra, an attorney advisor extraordinaire in the Bureau's Cybersecurity and Communications Reliability Division. I would also like to thank the division's outage reporting team and other Bureau staff for their hard work on this item, as well as the other bureaus and offices that contributed. Mr. Misra will now present the item.
Thank you, Chief Folks. Please go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you, Chief Folks. Good morning, Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel and Commissioners. As this year's weather events and wildfires continue to demonstrate, communications disruptions during disasters interfere with the transmission of not only 911 calls, but also first responder communications, emergency alert messages, and other life-saving information conveyed by wireline, wireless, cable and satellite networks, and broadcast facilities. Today's notice therefore seeks comment on a number of network reliability measures to better ensure that these emergency communications remain available to all Americans. Currently, disaster response and recovery efforts in the wireless industry are supported by the Wireless Network Resiliency Cooperative Framework, a voluntary industry agreement to provide roaming, foster mutual aid, and take other actions at these critical times. The notice first examines whether elements of the framework could be improved to better support emergency communications, including seeking comment on the conditions that should trigger activation of the framework, the scope of the framework's participants, and whether the public would benefit from codifying some or all of the framework in the FCC's rules. Next, to improve situational awareness, the notice examines ways to enhance the network status information that service providers supply to the Commission during disasters. For example, it seeks comment on ways to encourage greater participation in the Commission's voluntary disaster information reporting system and whether service providers should report their broadband service outages in the mandatory network outage reporting system. Last, as commercial power outages are a significant reason for network outages during and following disasters, the notice seeks comment on improving backup power availability at key communication sites. The notice seeks input on improving coordination between communication service providers and power companies, as well as deploying on-site backup power and other alternative measures to reduce the frequency, duration, and severity of power-related disruptions to communication services. The Bureau recommends adoption of the notice and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear comments from the bench. We will start with Commissioner Carr.
Thank you. This week, I had the opportunity to travel to Louisiana with Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel, a state that was hit hard by Hurricane Ida. I appreciated the invitation, the chance to join the chair on this visit because it afforded us an opportunity to hear directly from community leaders, public safety officials, and communication providers that are engaged in the ongoing recovery and restoration efforts. At the Louisiana State Emergency Operations Center in Baton Rouge, we met with members of the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. Travis Johnson, the head of the interoperability initiatives there, told us that when a service to a 911 call center that served a coastal parish went down, those phone calls for help started rolling over to his group's administrative line back in Baton Rouge. When those calls started ringing in, he gathered some pens and some paper, and his team started writing down the pleas for help. He read some of the shorthand notes that he and his team took during that meeting with us. Water in house, stuck in attic, need help. Another read, roof off house, kids aged 3 and 6 in home. Then about 2 hours after the phone started ringing, the flurry of calls just stopped. No more calls for help, just silence. The Emergency Operations Center still had connectivity, but cellular service in that coastal area where people were calling for help was lost. They still needed help. They just didn't have any way to call for it. At the same time, we heard stories about networks in call centers that remained resilient, stayed online, and absorbed the worst of Hurricane Ida's punch. In Livingston, Louisiana, we met with Captain Jack Vernado and his team at the area's 911 call center. Captain Vernado and a few others rode out the storm at that reinforced facility, which he noted swayed, creaked, and even leaked a little under the pressure of 100-plus-mile-an-hour winds. That call center maintained internet service during the entire storm, even though they lost telephone service for a portion of it. Further south in Raceland, where homes with blue tarps covering their upper floors seemed to outnumber those with intact roofs, we connected with some of the FirstNet team members that supported and bolstered connectivity in the area. They brought in Colts and cows, dirigibles to serve neighborhoods and parts of communities where terrestrial infrastructure had been knocked offline. Now, to put this storm in context, one of the power companies has reported that they lost about 30,000 utility poles due to Ida, which was actually more than the number of poles lost in Hurricanes Katrina, Ike, Delta, and Zeta combined. At the same time, the telecom networks, even though it hung on a lot of those poles, showed increased resiliency. Well, we saw 38 different 911 call centers lose service across the Gulf Coast during Katrina. Early reports indicate that that number dropped to potentially just 4 in Louisiana this time around. But the reality is that we can and must do so much better. The most important calls in emergencies are the ones to 911. That network needs to be robust and resilient. It's not acceptable when it fails. Now, after action reports are still being done, root causes of the outages are still being analyzed. So we'll continue to see what more we can do to promote robust networks. And now, from the feedback I heard in Louisiana with the chair this week, I'm particularly interested in a few topics. For one, in ideas that could ensure roaming during disasters proceeds more smoothly and seamlessly. For another, in ways we can get state officials more timely information about outages at 911 call centers, particularly where they have the resources to step in and help. And for yet another, in efforts to deepen the coordination between power restoration crews and their counterparts in telecom. After all, if you track the outage information in the wake of Hurricane Ida, you'll see that classic sawtooth pattern in the chart. As telecom services are restored one day, those same communication lines can be cut by power and other restoration crews that are doing their jobs, replacing poles, clearing roads. So there remains room for improvement there. I want to thank my colleagues for their willingness to incorporate some of my pre and post Louisiana edits to the item. First, I'm glad we're now asking even more comments about increasing situational awareness of 911 and other emergency services. Second, I'm pleased that we're seeking comment on enhancing the resiliency of covered 911 providers, particularly during power outages. And I'm pleased that we're seeking comment on promoting roaming more quickly in qualifying disasters. These are all vital to improving resiliency. So again, I want to thank the chair for the opportunity to travel with her and learn about this firsthand. I think it has made a difference with respect to the issues that we're seeking comment on and putting in perspective why this is so important, why we need to continue to make progress. So thanks again to her for that, and obviously for bringing this item forward to refresh the record on a range of issues. Thanks as well to the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for their work, for the individuals at the FCC that worked with the chair to get down into Louisiana, both before, during, and after the storm. This item itself obviously has my support. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Carr. Well stated. And now we will hear from Commissioner Starks.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Preparing our communication networks to withstand disasters and emergencies has never been more important. Challenges caused by climate change, everything from record highs and low temperatures to storms of greater ferocity and scope, are coming into sharper focus. And so now is the time for action. And robust modern communication networks must be part of our national strategy. I'm particularly excited about innovative uses of 5G, of course, smart meters for energy management that will help reduce our country's reliance on fossil fuels and better manage energy resources. But those solutions, all the benefits of broadband, are only as valuable as they are reliable. And I'm pleased to support today's NPRM because it represents a critical step towards keeping Americans connected during those emergencies and speeding the restoration of networks when the danger has passed. This is a comprehensive and wide-ranging inquiry, so I'll just highlight a few of the important features to me. First, this NPRM is an important part of the Commission's work, of course, to advance digital equity and inclusion. We should all know by now that the digital divide does not affect all communities in the same way. And so in particular, as I've repeatedly stated, Americans of color by a wide margin remain less likely to have that home broadband connection than their counterparts. We also know that extreme weather, natural disasters, and power outages are particularly devastating on those communities of color. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and I recently discussed this during the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's virtual annual legislative conference, where we discussed the terrible dynamic that played out and the devastating impact that Winter Storm Uri had throughout the nation, and particularly there in her community in central Houston. We will not have equal access to modern communications without improving the resiliency and reliability. Second, this NPRM seeks comment on whether we should make carrier participation in the disaster information recovery system mandatory, something I have long asked and called for on the Commission to actively consider. And so during a disaster, DERS provides a wealth of actionable information that can shape the local, state, and federal responses. Today, we don't always know if a carrier is not reporting because it has not chosen to or because it has sustained damage. That makes the company unable to report. And so with expanded DERS reporting, even more information will be valuable. I look forward to robust comments here. And then last, the NPRM brings much needed attention, as discussed, around the issues of backup power. In early 2020, I visited Puerto Rico to learn about the steps taken to improve network resiliency there after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, and how communication networks and recovery efforts performed during the earthquakes there as well. And as I met with those providers, regulators, and certainly everyday Puerto Ricans, a theme emerged that communication services are only as good as their access to power. And this, of course, is a recurring scenario. And so I'm glad that the NPRM asked detailed questions about how backup power can be deployed to reduce the frequency of power-related service disruptions. And so these issues and many others raised in this NPRM are urgent and important. Now is the time for the FCC to update these rules for this era of climate-based events. I thank, of course, Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for their hard work on this item and the many hours and countless investigations that preceded it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Starks. And now we'll hear from Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. I also would like to express my appreciation to the staff for their long and hard work on this issue, and no further comments from me.
All right. So this week I had the opportunity to see firsthand the devastation wrought by Hurricane Ida. As you've heard, Commissioner Carr joined me to crisscross a very long and very flat stretch of Louisiana from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. The drive itself was telling. Along the way, we saw cruel reminders of the storm and the great damage that wind and water can do. Mangled store signs and piles of refuse still being cleared away. Still, what struck me most was all of the blue, not the gray blue of Lake Pontchartrain. Instead, it was the bright blue of heavy plastic tarps. They were everywhere, on the pitched roofs of homes, on the flat tops of commercial buildings. They were part of fixing what had blown away. You know, that image stays with me, but so does the strength and resilience of everyone we met. They love where they live and are deeply committed to the restoration of their communities. They're also deeply invested in making sure that when the next storm comes, and it will, they are better prepared. Being better prepared means having more resilient communications. It means making sure our networks work when we need them most. I spoke with Governor John Bell Edwards about this before our trip, and I heard it from everyone we met. State public safety leaders in Baton Rouge, 911 call center operators in Livingston, broadband companies in LaPlace, and FirstNet officials in Raceland. Everyone we spoke with wanted to tell us their stories and give us their ideas. They wanted us to know what worked and what didn't, and how stronger and more resilient communications can save lives. I'm grateful Commissioner Carr was able to join me, and I thank all my colleagues for supporting the swift actions this agency took to assist both before and after the storm. To give you a sense of them, let me point out that in anticipation of landfall, the FCC set up an information hub for Hurricane Ida with emergency communications tips in 9 languages, tailored media advisories for broadcasters, downloadable public safety announcements, communications status reports, and other content. We deployed FCC staff directly to Louisiana, as well as the Federal Emergency Management Agency Regional Response Coordination Center for the storm in Dallas, Texas, to support spectrum management, perform damage assessments, and prioritize recovery efforts. And in coordination with FEMA and other partners, we activated our disaster information reporting system. As a result, we published the very first comprehensive assessment of Hurricane Ida's impact on communications networks, followed by daily updates. We provided technical assistance to 911 coordinators, state emergency operation centers, 911 call centers, carriers implementing the Wireless Resiliency Cooperative Framework, and other communications providers, as well as the Louisiana Association of Broadcasters. We engaged in daily coordination with federal, state, and local partners, as well as with industry, to help coordinate the transport of necessary communications equipment, fuel, and other resources to help fill communications gaps. And this is important. We set up a first of its kind team to try to address coordination with utilities to prevent accidental fiber cuts during debris removal and restoration. Of course, in doing all of this, we had help. Communications companies worked long and hard to restore critical services, and all of this made a difference. More than 98% of the cell sites in affected counties have been restored. Other outages trended downward fast as power was restored, and this is progress. But we have to understand where communications fell short, where recovery took too long, and what changes can be made to our networks to make them more resilient before the next unthinkable event occurs. Today's rulemaking gets that effort going. We start by taking a second look at the voluntary wireless resiliency cooperative framework and disaster roaming and ask, where can we strengthen it? Are best practices enough? Should coordination happen earlier? Should it be more automatic? This was something that came up repeatedly in our discussions in Louisiana, a desire for this cooperative roaming to work faster, work better, and help keep more people connected in disaster. We also revisit our disaster information reporting system and seek targeted comment on where there are gaps that need to be filled. 911 call centers should not be the last ones to find out where there are critical network failures. But we learned that during Hurricane Ida, that's exactly what happened. So we ask how we can improve data collection and timely notification during disasters. Finally, we renew our inquiry into backup power for communications facilities. Our review of the data collected in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida reveals that the lack of commercial power at key equipment and facilities is the single biggest reason why communications networks failed. Left unaddressed, this problem is only going to get worse in the coming years as we experience disasters with increasing severity, duration, and impact. So our rulemaking explores resilience strategies for power outages, including better coordination between communications providers and power companies, and backup power, or other measures that could help keep service running after a disaster. Now, I'm hopeful that this rulemaking is the beginning of a broader discussion of our need for resilient networks, because look around. We have hurricanes in Louisiana, a snowstorm in Texas, and wildfires out west. These issues are not going away. We need to think deeply about what network resiliency means and how our policies can support it. So in addition to this rulemaking, next month, the FCC will hold a virtual field hearing on Hurricane Ida and the resilient networks now needed in disaster more generally. And to make it simple, we'll have it as part of our monthly open meeting in October. So stay tuned for details. Now, I want to thank the incredible FCC staff who worked so hard to help pick up the pieces after Hurricane Ida. I want to thank them for their deep commitment to public safety. It's something I know all my colleagues share, so let me call them out by name. They include Suzanne Barnes, Kurt Bartholomew, Michael Kafara, Justin Kane, Emil Shireen, Paul Coburn, Sean Cochran, Rochelle Cohen, Venjan Cummings, Joseph Keith Davis, Michael Evelyn, Jose Feliciano, Michael Fletcher, John Healy, Deb Jordan, William Kang, Al Nair, Ron Lovins, Brian Liu, Tim Perrier, Jim Pearson, Haley Ramsauer, Jamie Rivas, Chris Smeek, Joanne Smith, John Snyder, Mark Stanicki, Julia Tu, and David Wright from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, as well as Derek Wybisky and Juan Silva from the Enforcement Bureau. I also want to thank the staff who worked on today's effort, including Justin Kane, Rochelle Cohen, Amanda Farrenhold, David Firth, Jennifer Holtz, Deb Jordan, Nikki McGinnis, Saswat Misra, Erica Olson, Austin Randazzo, and Renee Rowland from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, David Horowitz, Andrea Kelly, Linda Oliver, Joel Rabinowitz, Bill Richardson, Anjali Singh, and Shin Yu from the Office of General Counsel, Carrie Hicks, Susanna Larson, and Charles Mathias from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Kirk Bergerie and Dan Kahn from the Wireline Competition Bureau, Tom Horan, John Kiefer, Barbara Kreisman, and Al Sheldiner from the Media Bureau, Diane Burstein, Susie Rosen-Singleton, and Bill Wallace from the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, Chuck Needy, Catherine Maltraves, and Emily Talaga from the Office of Economics and Analytics, Jeremy Marcus, Elizabeth Mumon, Ashley Tyson from the Enforcement Bureau, Jennifer Gilsonan, Carl Kensinger, Catherine Medley, Carrie Murray, Troy Tanner, and Marissa Velez from the International Bureau, Regina Brown and Sarah Stone from the Office of Managing Director, and Shauna Wilkerson from the Office of Communications Business Opportunities. It really is an all-hands efforts at the agency when it comes to disaster recovery. So we will now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approved.
And the chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners, item 2 on your agenda is entitled Reassessing 4.9 gigahertz band for public safety and will be presented by the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. Once again, Lisa Folks, Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Welcome back, Ms. Folks. Please proceed with introducing the second item on today's agenda.
Good morning again, Acting Chairwoman Rosen-Worcel and Commissioners. First responders must be able to communicate effectively in order to protect the public. In 2002, the Commission designated the 4.9 gigahertz band for public safety operations. Earlier this year, the Commission stayed implementation of a prior decision that would have fragmented the band and decreased the amount of spectrum available for public safety use. Today, we present an order on reconsideration and notice of proposed rulemaking that would reset the 4.9 gigahertz band rules and chart a new course for enhancing public safety and realizing the full potential of the spectrum. With me at the virtual table today are from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Haley Peacher, an attorney advisor on detail to the Mobility Division, and from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Thomas Ang, engineer extraordinaire in the Policy and Licensing Division. This item was truly an inter-bureau team effort. So I would like to thank the team from both bureaus for their work on this item, as well as the other bureaus and offices that contributed. Ms. Peacher and Mr. Ang will present the item.
Thank you, Chief Folks. Good morning, Acting Chairwoman Rosen-Worcel and Commissioners. Last October, the Commission adopted a state-by-state leasing framework that would have allowed states to open the 4.9 gigahertz band to non-public safety uses. 3 public safety organizations filed petitions for reconsideration of that decision. This item follows the Commission's action in May to stay implementation of the state lessor framework, which had not yet become effective. The order on reconsideration that you are considering today grants the petitions for reconsideration insofar as the public safety petitioners request deletion of the state-by-state leasing rules and partially lifts the freeze on application in the ban, which will allow existing licensees to modify their licenses and apply for new fixed site licenses. These actions set the stage for the Commission to reassess the 4.9 GHz band in a way that emphasizes public safety while also encouraging innovative uses of this spectrum. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Tom, who will present the proposals in the 8th further notice of proposed rulemaking.
Good morning, and thank you, Haley. The notice before you today represents a comprehensive effort to establish a nationwide framework for the 4.9 gigahertz band and seeks comment on a series of options to maximize the use of the band to support public safety, leverage technological advancements such as 5G, foster a robust equipment market, and address growing commercial interest in the band. First, the notice proposes to adopt a nationwide framework for the band that emphasizes public safety needs. Second, the notice seeks comment on mechanisms to ensure public safety use of the band, including protecting public safety licensees from harmful interference, collecting more granular licensing data, and improving the licensing database, adopting standards to promote interoperability, and requiring priority and preemption for public safety in any spectrum sharing framework. Third, the notice explores ways to foster greater public safety use of the band, including requiring some form of formal frequency coordination, designating a nationwide band manager or regional planning committees to manage public safety spectrum use, and promoting innovation and the use of the latest technologies in the band, including 5G. Fourth, the notice seeks comment on alternative ways to facilitate non-public safety access to the 4.9 gigahertz band that is compatible with public safety, including allowing public safety licensees to lease excess capacity on their facilities to non-public safety users, implementing a shared access model that would allow non-public safety use while prioritizing public safety access, establishing overlay or other licensing options for non-public safety operations, and exploring technical flexibility and auction-based alternatives that would be consistent with the proposed nationwide framework. The bureaus recommend adoption of this item and request editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear comments from the bench. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. Over the last 4 years, the FCC took the steps necessary to unleash an unprecedented amount of mid-band spectrum. And those efforts included action on 280 megahertz in the C-band, 45 megahertz in the 5.9 gigahertz band, 1200 megahertz in the 6 gigahertz band, 30 megahertz in the L band, 200 megahertz in the 2.5 gigahertz band, 50 megahertz in the 4.9 gigahertz band, as well as all the work to prepare 100 megahertz in the 3.45 gigahertz band for auction next month. Now, each of those bands took quite a lot of work over the course of many months and in most cases years. And that's why I was disappointed when the FCC voted to take the 50 megahertz at 4.9 off the board earlier this year by staying our 2020 decision. I dissented from that decision, but as I said at the time, I'm open to working with my colleagues, the public safety community, and all other stakeholders on a new framework for this important band of spectrum. And that remains true today. I'd say that I would be the first to say that our 2020 decision certainly isn't the only way to ensure 4.9 gets put to productive use, but I think the chair and Commissioner Symington and Starks were before me in reaching that conclusion. So while I concur on the portion of today's decision that reverses our 2020 order, I approve of the notice that seeks comment on a path forward. I welcome the chance to work together towards a quick resolution that serves the public interest and in particular, the public safety stakeholders that have a deep commitment in this band. So I want to thank the staff of the Wireless Bureau, the Public Safety Bureau for their work, as well as the chair for bringing this item up for vote. It has my support. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Starks.
Yes, thank you. It's been nearly 20 years since the Commission first designated the 4.9 gigahertz band for public safety use, and admittedly, the results have been frustrating at best. And while FCC records show over 3,500 licenses in the band, it is widely agreed that the spectrum remains underutilized. but I did disagree with the item adopted last year in the last administration. I thought it was not sound policy making to have the state-by-state licensing regime. And as I stated in my dissent at that time, the majority's decision could have caused public safety usage in that band to become less efficient, less secure, less reliable. And so today's decision takes a much stronger approach by starting with the recognition that public safety is the primary purpose of the band. We should focus our efforts on fostering greater public safety use of the band. And so that means a nationwide coordinated approach to manage the band with better frequency coordination, greater understanding of spectrum usage availability, and encouragement of greater usage. And so while recognizing that public safety should remain the priority, I also support asking how we might expand the use of the band to non-public safety entities, whether through leases, segmenting of the band, managed access, or some other form of sharing. I do look forward to hearing from commenters on how those entities could use the band in a manner that does not cause harmful interference. So I also support the item, and thank you to the staff for their hard work.
Thank you, Commissioner Starks. Now we'll hear from Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. I'm happy to approve today's item. I'm particularly encouraged by the fact that the 8th further notice explores an exclusive use licensing approach for commercial use of the 4.9 gigahertz band, which could prove beneficial from an operational and economic perspective. An auction of exclusive use licenses for 5G and other advanced services would harvest the most value for the 4.9 gigahertz band, as we saw with the C-band auction, and such an approach also stands the best chance of creating a more robust 5G equipment ecosystem that public safety licensees operating in the band so desperately need. Thanks very much.
Thank you, commissioners. On September 11th, it is now ritual. We remember the attacks that drew us together as a nation. We come together in the shared sorrow of nearly 3,000 lives lost. And we honor the heroism of so many first responders who ran toward danger and saved the lives of so many more. It is hard to believe it has now been 2 decades since that fateful day. We've learned a lot in the intervening years about strength and resilience and about public safety and what kind of support they need to do their jobs. So I believe it is appropriate in September that the Federal Communications Commission turns its attention to first responders and asks how we can ensure our rules and policies help those who help us in danger. And that starts with communications, making sure public safety has the networks they need to respond when the unthinkable occurs. Today, we commit to public safety opportunities in the 4.9 gigahertz band. Last year, in a decision I believe was misguided, the FCC gave state authorities the right to remove public safety from these airwaves and pursue revenue opportunities with this spectrum. From front to back, this decision lacked support in the record, and I think there were 3 things that were wrong with it. First, by breaking the 4.9 gigahertz band into a patchwork of state leases, it reversed 2 decades of work to increase interoperability for first responder communications in response to the events of September 11th. Second, by fragmenting the 4.9 gigahertz band at the state level, it reduced the likelihood we would have consistent and reliable information about what spectrum is available and how it is being used. Third, by pulling back the 4.9 gigahertz band at a time when we are facing a devastating pandemic, raging wildfires, seasonal hurricanes, and increased use of communications across the board, it denied public safety networks opportunities to grow. To be clear, there is room for improving public safety use of the 4.9 gigahertz band, but taken together, these 3 problems demonstrate, I think, that the FCC's earlier decision was not the right way to go. So we're vacating those earlier rules. In addition, we are kicking off a new rulemaking to think big about the future of the 4.9 gigahertz band with public safety fully in mind. For starters, we asked how we can advance their access to the latest technologies like 5G, and we've got new ideas to make it happen. To this end, we seek comment on expanding priority and preemption for public safety users, excess capacity leasing, and shared access models like the Citizens Broadband radio service. I'm convinced there are creative opportunities for this spectrum that help us expand our 5G future and bring public safety communications along too. Thank you to all of my colleagues for their input into this effort. Thank you also to Ken Carlberg, Stephen Carpenter, Rochelle Cohen, Tom Eng, John Evanoff, Lisa Folks, David Firth, Charlene Collazo Goldfield, Brian Hedgepeth, William Kang, Deb Jordan, Brian Marenko, Nicole McGinnis, Saswat Misra, Roberto Mussenden, Erica Olson, Austin Randazzo, Rasul Safavian, Tracy Simmons, and Zenji Nakahawa from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. John Markman, Charles Mathias, Roger Noel, Haley Preacher, Paul Powell, Catherine Schroeder, and Joel Tavenblatt from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Jeremy Marcus, Raphael Snader, and Ashley Tyson from the Enforcement Bureau, Justin Fall from the Wireline Competition Bureau, Maura McGowan and Chana Wilkerson from the Office of Communications Business Opportunities, Jonathan Campbell, William Huber, Evan Quirrell, Paul LaFontaine, Kate Matraves, Gary Michaels, Eric Salavara, Martha Standstill, Donald Stockdale, and Emily Talaga from the Office of Economics and Analytics, David Horowitz, Douglas Klein, and William Richardson from the Office of General Counsel, and Dina Shetler from the Office of Managing Director. And after thanking them, let's proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Carr.
Concur in part, approve in part.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington. I think that.
Approve.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Symington. The chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners, item 3 on your agenda will be presented by the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau and is entitled Shielding 911 Call Centers from Robocalls. Patrick Weber, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Weber, please proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. Today, I am pleased to introduce an item that takes an important step toward protecting the integrity and availability of our nation's emergency communication systems, including the security of our nation's 911 call centers. The item before you builds upon a broader work to strengthen the nation's 911 systems by proposing a new path forward to fulfill Congress's mandate to protect public safety answering points, or PSAPs, from disruptive robocalls through the creation of a PSAP Do Not Call registry in a safe and secure way. I would like to thank the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, the Enforcement Bureau, the Office of Economics and Analytics, the Office of General Counsel, and the Office of Communications Business Opportunities for their valuable assistance with this item. Rebecca Macaroni, Attorney Advisor in CGB's Consumer Policy Division, will present the item.
Good morning, Acting Chairwoman and Commissioners. This further notice of proposed rulemaking before you today proposes to bolster protections to public safety phone lines from unwanted robocalls that can disrupt emergency services. Auto dialers can generate large numbers of unwanted and disruptive calls to emergency lines, thus interfering with public safety communication systems, diverting critical responder resources, and impeding the public's access to emergency services. In response to this concern, Congress has required the Commission to create a Do Not Call registry for telephone numbers used by public safety answering points, or PSAPs, and prohibit the use of auto dialers to contact those registered numbers. In light of the possible security risk posed by the Commission's previous approach that would grant auto dialer operator access to PSAP numbers in the registry, this further notice of proposed rulemaking proposes a new approach that would avoid such risks. Specifically, the item proposes that voice service providers be provided with the telephone numbers callers use to make auto dial calls. These voice service providers would be required to block auto dial calls from those telephone numbers when made to a registered PSAP telephone number. We believe this call blocking approach will encourage participation by auto dialer operators and PSAPs on the Do Not Call registry by providing an efficient and secure means to facilitate compliance with the statutory obligation to protect PSAPs from auto dial calls. We also take this opportunity to seek comment on the extent to which auto dial calls continue to be a problem for PSAPs, our assessment of the security risks associated with granting auto dialer operators access to registered PSAP numbers, whether there are other technological or regulatory solutions that should be considered to prevent auto dial calls to PSAP numbers, and finally, ways to protect PSAPs from threats other than disruptive robocalls. We recommend adoption of this item and request editorial privileges to make technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear any comments from the bench. Commissioner Carr.
I appreciate the team for their work on this. This is an important one. No separate statement for me other than my thanks.
Commissioner Starks.
Yes, a brief statement, and I'll have a longer one for the record, but everyday public safety answering points offer millions of Americans support and assistance in moments of crisis, and these are precious seconds. And we cannot have those PSAP phone lines tied up by robocalls. So I support this item, and thank you for the hard work.
Thank you. Commissioner Symington.
I'd also like to express my appreciation to the team for their hard work on this. No separate statement.
Thank you, commissioners. Robocalls that interrupt your family dinner are annoying, but robocalls that get in the way of your ability to call 911, that's a whole other level because they could be fatal. Recognizing this, Congress directed the FCC to adopt rules to establish a special do not call registry for the telephone numbers used at our nation's 911 call centers. Here's how the idea would work. We would create a list of telephone numbers of public safety answering points across the country, and anyone using automatic calling systems, including telemarketers, would have to check this list before dialing to make sure that they wouldn't interfere with public safety. Now, this is a really good idea in theory, but in practice, it has some problems because once you put all those numbers in one place, how do you make sure the list stays secure? A bad actor with access to the list could flood a 911 call center with automatically dialed robocalls and cut off access to essential public safety systems. In other words, in an effort to eliminate the threat of auto-dialed robocalls to public safety answering points, are we inadvertently creating a new public safety threat? This brings us to right now, because instead of creating the special do not call registry for 911 call centers as originally planned, I think we have a better idea. Why not have voice call providers block these calls so they never reach our nation's public safety answering points in the first place? Think about it. It limits access to the registry to a verified list of voice providers, a much smaller group, and that means we can effectively develop safeguards to protect it. We think this is a promising approach, but we want to get this right. So in this rulemaking, we're asking, how can we improve it? Are there other solutions we should consider? And what other security threats do we need to address? A big thank you to our partners at the Federal Trade Commission in the public safety community and across industry who helped us identify these security concerns and think creatively about how to fix them. I also want to thank Bob Aldrich, Jerusha Burnett, Aaron Garza, Rebecca Marconi, Erica McMahon, Karen Schroeder, David Saratsky, Richard Smith, Mark Stone, Christy Thornton, and Patrick Weber from the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, Kenneth Carlberg, David Firth, Ryan Hedgepeth, Nikki McGinnis, Erica Olson, and Austin Randazzo from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Matthew Collins and Dan Kahn from the Wireline Competition Bureau, Valerie Hill, Rick Mallon, and Bill Richardson from the Office of General Counsel, Mary Romano, Christy Thompson, and Lisa Zana from the Enforcement Bureau, Virginia Matala and Emily Talaga from the Office of Economics and Analytics, and Tadel Shifaroff from the Office of Managing Director. We will now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
And the chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners, the fourth item today, entitled Stopping Illegal Robocalls from Entering American Phone Networks, will be presented by the Consumer Governmental Affairs and the Wireline Competition Bureau. Patrick Weber, Chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and Chris Monteith, Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau, will introduce the item.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Weber, please proceed and get us started.
Good morning again, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. Today, I am pleased to introduce on behalf of the Wireline Competition and Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureaus, an item that, if adopted, would propose rules that further combat illegal robocalls. It specifically targets foreign-originated illegal robocalls by proposing requirements for gateway providers that build on the Commission's prior work on both the caller ID authentication and call blocking fronts. Before turning the presentation over to WCB and CGB staff, I would like to thank the Enforcement Bureau, the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, the Office of Communications Business Opportunities, the Office of Economics and Analytics, and the Office of General Counsel for their valuable assistance. Jonathan Lecter, Attorney Advisor in WCB's Competition Policy Division, and Jerusha Burnett, Attorney Advisor in CGB's Consumer Policy Division, will jointly present the item. Jonathan?
Thank you very much. Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. This further notice of proposed rulemaking before you, if adopted, would continue the Commission's work targeting illegal robocalls by addressing the vexing problem of foreign-originated illegal calls. As an initial matter, this item proposes to define gateway providers as the first US-based provider in the call path of a foreign-originated call with a US number that then transmits that call downstream. The item proposes and seeks comment on several new obligations for gateway providers regarding STIR/SHAKEN. The STIR/SHAKEN caller ID authentication framework allows for authenticated caller ID information to securely travel with the call itself throughout the entire length of the call path. Now that voice service providers have implemented STIR/SHAKEN or a robocall mitigation program, a key component of our anti-robocall efforts is in effect. However, bad actors abroad continue to remain largely outside of our caller ID authentication scheme. To that end, this further notice proposes to place additional requirements on gateway providers to ensure that they are doing their part to combat the scourge of illegal robocalls. First, the item proposes to require gateway providers to authenticate caller ID information consistent with STIR/SHAKEN for calls that they receive that are not already authenticated. Second, it proposes to require gateway providers to submit a certification to the robocall mitigation database describing the robocall mitigation practices and stating that they are adhering to those practices. Now I'll turn the discussion over to Jerusha Burnett of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau to discuss proposals for gateway providers to assist in traceback and to mitigate illegal calls. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. The item also proposes and seeks comment on a number of additional obligations for gateway providers and, in one case, the US-based provider that receives a call from a gateway provider to ensure that foreign-originated illegal robocalls are stopped before they ever reach American consumers. First, the item proposes to build on the existing requirement that all providers respond to traceback by requiring response to traceback requests within 24 hours. Second, it proposes to implement mandatory blocking requirements, which include requiring gateway providers to block rather than simply effectively mitigate illegal traffic when notified of such traffic by the Commission, requiring the providers immediately downstream from the gateway provider to block calls from a gateway provider if that gateway provider fails to block or effectively mitigate illegal traffic upon Commission notification, and requiring gateway providers to block calls that are highly likely to be illegal based on reasonable analytics. Third, it proposes to require gateway providers to confirm that a foreign call originator that uses a US telephone number to originate a call is authorized to use that number. Finally, it proposes to adopt a general mitigation standard for gateway providers. The item also seeks comment on alternative approaches to prevent foreign-originated illegal calls from reaching American consumers. The Wireline Competition and Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureaus recommend adoption of this item and request editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you to both bureaus. We will now hear comments from the bench. Commissioner Carr.
Well, thank you so much to the team for the continued efforts to nip these calls in the bud. I think this effort is going to be another one in the multi-pronged approach that it's going to take to fully break the back of illegal robocalls. So thanks again for the team for the work on this. Thanks.
Commissioner Starks.
Yes, I'll have a longer statement for the record, but I'm proud of the work that we've done here. Obviously, continuing, there is still more to do to combat illegal, unwanted robocalls. And I've long said, illegal robocalls will continue as long as those initiating and facilitating them can get away with it and profit from it. And so foreign originated illegal robocalls is something that we need to continue to crack down on. And so proposing to require US-based gateway providers point of entry for foreign calls into the United States be the first line of defense is something that I am soundly ready to approve of. So thank you for the hard work by the team.
Thank you, Commissioner Starks. Now, Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. I appreciate the team's hard work. No further statement.
Thank you, Commissioners. Predictably, I have a statement. Robocalls are singularly annoying, but there is no one single solution to get them off the line. So we are firing on all fronts. We're enforcing the law. We're sending cease and desist letters to companies running robocall campaigns to tell them that they have 48 hours to knock it off, or we will tell all other carriers to reject their traffic. We adopted the largest FCC fine in history for spoofing. We also adopted the largest FCC fine in history under the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. In short, we're bringing new heat to our enforcement, and we're not going to stop until we get these calls off the line. We're giving consumers new tools. We've empowered consumers with new blocking tools and have given carriers the regulatory green light to block illegal calls before they reach our homes and businesses. We're using new technologies. We're requiring carriers to put stir-shaken technology in their networks. And with this caller authentication system in place, carriers can know that callers really are who they say they are, and we can stop spoofing at the source. We're also making carriers use a new robocall mitigation database. Every carrier in the United States is required to register and tell us what they're doing to stop robocalls. But we're not just looking at their plans, because if carriers fail to register, we're going to tell all other carriers to block their calls. And we're shutting down loopholes. With reports finding that more and more robocalls are coming to us from outside of this country, we need to find a way to cut them off before they reach our shores. After all, we don't want international calling to become a loophole for our policies. So today we are proposing that gateway providers in the United States, the companies that bring in calls from overseas, take action to stop this stuff from coming in from abroad. That means they need to use stir-shaken technology, register in our robocall mitigation database, and comply with traceback requests to figure out where these junk calls are originating from overseas. This will help us tackle the growing number of international robocalls, because we can't have these scam artists multiplying abroad and hiding from our regulatory reach. We're going to have to stop these nuisance calls before they reach our homes and businesses. And if the tools we have here are not up to task, we will need to go to Congress and ask for more. Thank you to the robocall response team for their efforts on this, and specifically, thank you to Pam Arlick, Michelle Burlove, Matt Collins, Dan Kahn, Jonathan Lecter, and Chris Monteith of the Wireline Competition Bureau, Robert Aldrich, Jerusha Burnett, Aaron Garza, Karen Schroeder, Mark Stone, Christy Thornton, and Patrick Weber of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, Patrick DeGrava, Chuck Needy, and Emily Talaga of the Office of Economics and Analytics, Lisa Gelb, David Strickland, Christy Thompson, and Lisa Zana of the Enforcement Bureau, Kimberly Cook, Wayne Layton, and Jim Schlichting of the International Bureau, Ken Carlberg, and David Firth of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Belford Lawson, and Sanford Williams of the Office of Communications Business Opportunities, and Michelle Ellison, Rick Mallon, Linda Oliver, Bill Richardson, and Derek Yeo of the Office of General Counsel. And with that, we will proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
And the chair votes aye. So the item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, moving right along, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
I'll try that again. Madam Chairwoman, Commissioners, the fifth item today, entitled Supporting Broadband for Tribal Libraries Through E-Rate, will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. Chris Monteith, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. The Wireline Competition Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration a notice of proposed rulemaking that, if adopted, proposes to modify the definition of tribal library to make clear that tribal libraries are eligible to participate in the E-Rate program. I would like to thank the Bureau team and our colleagues in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau's Office of Native Affairs and Policy and the Office of General Counsel for their hard work on this item. Kate Dumichel, a special counsel in the Wireline Competition Bureau's Telecommunications Access and Policy Division, will now present the item. Kate.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. In today's Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, we propose to update the definition of library in the Commission's E-rate program rules. The E-rate program provides support to ensure that schools and libraries can obtain affordable, high-speed broadband services and internal connections to connect today's students and library patrons with next-generation learning opportunities and services. Since the adoption of the E-rate program rules in 1997, however, some tribal libraries haven't been able to seek E-rate support because they were ineligible for Library Services and Technology Act funds from their state library administrative agencies, as required by Section 254H4 of the Communications Act. In 2018, Congress amended the Library Services and Technology Act to specifically include tribal libraries in the definition of libraries that are eligible for support from a state library administrative agency, but the Commission's rules remain unchanged. Today's notice proposes to change that. Specifically, the notice before you today, if adopted, would propose to add tribal libraries to the definition of library and remove references to an outdated version of the Library Services and Technology Act that has impeded tribal libraries' ability to participate in the program. This proposed rule change is consistent with the definition of library the Commission adopted in the recent Emergency Connectivity Fund order. While some tribal libraries have received E-rate support to the extent the relevant state library administrative agencies determined they were eligible for assistance, they are still greatly underrepresented among the total number of E-rate applicants. According to a report by the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums, only 15% of tribal libraries reported receiving E-rate support, in part due to eligibility requirements. By making it clear that tribal libraries are eligible for E-rate support, we seek to further the goal of increasing tribal libraries' access to advanced telecommunications and information services, internal connections, and basic maintenance of internal connections through the E-rate program. The notice also seeks comment on other measures the Commission should consider to ensure tribal entities have access to the E-rate program. The staff recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges.
Thank you. We will now hear any comments from the bench. Commissioner Carr, you take it first.
Thank you. The Pine Ridge Indian Reservation stretches across 2.7 million acres from the Badlands of South Dakota down and along the border with Nebraska. It's an area roughly the size of the entire state of Connecticut. And when I visited 2 years ago, it was clear that the area's vast distances and higher than average poverty rates created obstacles for broadband builds and adoption alike. And these challenges aren't unique to Pine Ridge. Indeed, our latest reporting indicates that 21% of people on tribal land lack access to broadband, lagging behind the progress that's been made in other communities. The opportunities that come with an affordable connection are also clear. While visiting the library at the Mescalero Apache School in New Mexico last year, I met a student named Lana that had used her school's broadband connection to write code for a miniature robot, pursuing a STEM education. Today's decision proposes to build on that type of success and extend the opportunities for connectivity at more tribal libraries. So I want to thank the acting chair for her focus on this and for bringing the item forward. It has my support.
Thank you. Commissioner Starks.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. For millions of Americans, E-rate has made the local library an on-ramp to all the benefits broadband can offer. In 1994, only 21% of libraries offered internet access to the public. And by 2014, an annual study conducted by the American Library Association and the University of Maryland's Information and Policy Access Center found that virtually all libraries offered free public Wi-Fi. Today, after more than 20 years of investment through the E-rate program, 21st century libraries now offer an invaluable combination of publicly accessible technologies, digital content, staff who are helpful in navigating resources to meet educational, employment, health, other goals. It would be hard to overstate the difference these services make to somebody who needs help, for example, applying for a job or finding healthcare information. But in tribal communities, these offerings are especially critical. USAC has reported that 38% of tribal libraries are the only source of free public internet access in their communities. At the beginning of my tenure as a commissioner, I dedicated one of my very first trips to learning about the many strategies, including library programs, that tribal communities are using to close the digital divide. I accompanied then Congressman, now Senator Ben Ray Lujan, to libraries in the pueblos of San Felipe and Santo Domingo. And there I learned about the Middle Rio Grande Valley Tribal Consortium's effort to bring fiber connectivity to libraries there in the pueblo of Santo Domingo, an area where many homes lack broadband. And I'll never forget the words of Miss Cynthia Aguilar, a librarian with the Santo Domingo Pueblo Library. She described the transformative impact of broadband connectivity when she compared it to the arrival of the railroad to the pueblo nearly a century prior. E-rate support should be amplifying and expanding what librarians like Ms. Aguilar offer to their communities. And we must expand E-rate's research reach in tribal areas. And so I'm pleased to support this NPRM, which proposes to update the E-rate program's definition of library and make clear that tribal libraries are eligible. I'm hopeful, deeply hopeful, that this update, which of course, as mentioned, mirrors our Emergency Connectivity Fund rules, will lead to more E-rate support for our tribal libraries. So this item has my strong support, and thank you to all the commission staff who've worked very hard on this. And I look forward to quickly updating our E-rate rules and reviewing comments here. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. No additional statement.
All right. Well, this is going to be my contribution to moving things along quickly because I want to echo the sentiments of my colleague, Commissioner Carr, his stories about Pine Ridge Reservation, and also like Commissioner Starks, I actually spent some time with the Santo Domingo Pueblo Reservation right after they got connected. It was incredible. We want more libraries to be able to have that experience and more people who live on tribal lands to be able to get connected. Thank you to a whole bunch of people who work on connecting schools and libraries across the country in the FCC. And in particular, let me call them out. Allison Baker, Kate Duchamel, Sue McNeil, Chris Monteith, Mark Nadell, Ryan Palmer, Janae Schreiber, Matt Ubas, Gregory Vadas of the Wireline Competition Bureau, Melina Bartolai, Elizabeth Lyon, Richard Mellon, Linda Oliver, Jeffrey Steinberg of the Office of General Counsel, Matthew Duquesne, Barbara Esbin of the Consumer Governmental Affairs Bureau, and Patrick Bergen, Eugene Kiselev, Kenneth Lynch, Mark Montano, Eric Ralph, Michelle Schaefer, Emily Talaga of the Office of Economics and Analytics. We'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
Chair votes aye, and this item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. So, Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Once again. Madam Chairwoman of Commissioners, the sixth item today, entitled Strengthening Security Review of Companies with Foreign Ownership, will be presented by the International Bureau, and Thomas Sullivan, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners.
Please proceed. Thanks, Mr. Sullivan.
You're welcome. And good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. The second report in order before you today marks the final step in implementing rules and procedures that will facilitate a more streamlined and transparent process for coordinating applications with executive branch agencies for their views on any national security and law enforcement issues associated with certain commission applicants with reportable foreign ownership. This process was initiated by the Commission last September with the adoption of the Executive Branch Review Order. Today's action ensures that the Commission's public interest analysis will continue to benefit from the executive branch's national security and law enforcement expertise. The second report in order will provide regulatory certainty, significantly decrease administrative burdens, and result in a timely and transparent process for Commission applicants. I would like to thank the staff from the International Bureau, Media Bureau, Wireline Competition Bureau, Office of General Counsel, Office of Economics and Analytics, Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and Office of Communications Business Opportunities for their collaborative work on this item. Jocelyn Jazirny of the International Bureau will present the item.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel and Commissioners. The second report in order before you adopts a set of standardized national security and law enforcement questions, referred to as standard questions, that will replace the initial national security and law enforcement questions that certain applicants with reportable foreign ownership currently receive from the executive branch agencies. On September 30th, 2020, the Commission adopted the Executive Branch Review Order, which established rules and procedures to facilitate a more streamlined and transparent review process for coordinating applications with the executive branch agencies for their views on any national security, law enforcement, foreign policy, or trade policy issues associated with the applicants. The adoption of the standard questions in this second report in order marks the final step in implementing the Executive Branch Review Order. For over 20 years, as a part of its public interest review, the Commission has referred to the executive branch agencies applications for international Section 214 authorizations, submarine cable licenses, applications to assign, transfer, control, or modify such authorizations and licenses where the applicant has reportable foreign ownership, and all petitions for Section 310B foreign ownership rulings. On April 4th, 2020, Executive Order 13913 established the Committee for the Assessment of Foreign Participation in the United States Telecommunications Services Sector, referred to as the Committee, to assist the Commission in its public interest review of national security and law enforcement concerns, replacing the ad hoc Team Telecom Review. This committee is composed of several agencies with expertise in these areas. To expedite the committee's review of national security and law enforcement issues, the Commission last year directed the International Bureau to develop a set of standard questions that seek detailed and comprehensive information that applicants would submit directly to the committee prior to or at the same time they file their applications with the Commission. This process would replace the prior practice of the committee seeking such information directly from the applicants after the Commission refers the applications. On December 30th, 2020, the International Bureau issued a public notice seeking comment on a proposed set of standard questions that were based on questionnaires currently used by the committee to obtain information from applicants and petitioners. In response, 5 parties filed comments and 6 ex parte letters were filed, including 1 letter reflecting input from committee staff. In the second report in order, there are 6 sets of baseline national security and law enforcement standard questions and a supplement for the submission of personally identifiable information. The standard questions seek information on corporate structure and shareholders, relationships with foreign entities, including governments, financial condition and circumstances, compliance with applicable laws and regulations, and business and operational information such as services to be provided and network infrastructure. The standard questions, which were improved and clarified based on the comments in the record, will ensure that the committee has the information it needs to conduct its national security and law enforcement review, while also addressing concerns raised by commenters who stated that certain questions, as proposed previously, were unclear or overly burdensome. The implementation of the standard questions will provide regulatory certainty, significantly decrease administrative burdens, and result in a timely and transparent process for applicants, thereby encouraging and facilitating foreign investment and the provision of new services and infrastructure in the United States. After completion of review of these questions by the Office of Management and Budget, the International Bureau will issue a public notice announcing the effective date of the standard questions and make the standard questions available on the FCC's website. The International Bureau requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear comments from the bench. We'll begin with Commissioner Carr.
Thank you. In 2020, following a years-long effort, powered substantially along the way by the work of Commissioner O'Reilly, we adopted significant reforms to Team Telecom's review process. While Team Telecom's work is vital to our national security, its process had become opaque and slow-moving. So I was pleased to join with my colleagues in improving that process by promoting greater transparency and certainty. Today's vote to adopt standardized questions will further streamline that review process while ensuring that Team Telecom has timely access to the information it needs. And our decision here builds on a series of steps more broadly that the agency has taken to promote the security of our communications networks. In 2018, for instance, I asked my colleagues to broaden the scope of our supply chain proceeding to consider the removal of insecure gear. Flash forward to this week when we announced that the reimbursement window for our now stood up RIP and replace program will open just next month. In 2019, I called for the FCC to conduct a top to bottom review of every telecom carrier with ties to the communist regime in China. The FCC subsequently initiated investigations into several carriers, which led to Section 214 revocation proceedings against China Unicom, Pacific Networks, and ComNet. And earlier this year, I called for the Commission to look at preventing any entity on the agency's covered entity list from obtaining the FCC equipment authorizations necessary to operate their devices here in the U.S. Acting Chair Rosenworcel launched that type of proceeding just a few weeks or months ago. But our work here is obviously far from over. We need to quickly adopt final orders in our Section 214 investigations. We need to close the loophole in our equipment authorization process to ensure that equipment from entities that pose a national security risk will no longer be eligible for FCC approval. And we need to continue our review of all threats to the security of our communications infrastructure, whether those threats come from carriers or service providers, hardware, or software. Finally, I want to thank the International Bureau for their work on this item, and throughout this long reform process, their efforts have paid off, and the item has my support. Thanks.
Commissioner Starks.
Yes, thank you. The importance of effective coordination with the executive branch on petitions and applications that will potentially impact national security and law enforcement cannot be overstated. Last year, we adopted rules and procedures to facilitate a more streamlined and transparent process for coordinating review of applications involving foreign ownership with the executive branches. Today, we take another vital step by adopting a set of standardized questions that certain entities with reportable foreign ownership will be required to answer as part of the national security and law enforcement review process. I'm pleased to support this action. Not only will it enhance transparency and predictability for parties subject to executive branch review, it will also help streamline the process consistent with the firm timelines mandated in the executive order. And these are complex issues that will require effective and efficient coordination to ensure we best serve the American people. Just last month, the committee, formerly Team Telecom, requested to review the planned $15 billion acquisition of Five9 by Zoom. This deal involves the transfer of control of certain common carrier licenses with the FCC, and more importantly, is holistically a reminder of the need for us to continue to work together in a coordinated fashion with the executive branch. And so I appreciate the committee's proactive outreach on that transaction, but more importantly, welcome their expertise to help ensure that we here at the FCC, as we look at the whole slate in the sector, we're well informed as we reach decisions on generally applications subject to our review that involve foreign participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Well stated. Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. Today's item takes the final step to implement the rules and procedures adopted in the Executive Branch Review Order to facilitate streamlined review of FCC applications involving foreign ownership. And I'm pleased to vote to support this item and express my gratitude to the Commission staff for all their diligent work.
Thank you, Commissioners. Communications networks have never been simple, but the digital age has multiplied their complexity, increasing our connections around the world. And investment in these new networks now flows at a global scale. In the United States, however, we have long had a framework in the Communications Act to assess foreign investment in our operators and licensees. This framework is smart and puts security interests front and center. But it merits an update for the digital age, and that is exactly what we do today. The Communications Act has several provisions that specifically limit the percentage of foreign ownership in our operators and licensees. When the Federal Communications Commission assesses transfers of control under these provisions, it also has a duty to ensure that they are in the public interest. Now, in practice, this review entails making sure that foreign ownership does not raise any national security or law enforcement concerns. This is not an effort that the agency handles on its own. We work closely with other agencies across government, including the Department of Justice, Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of State, Department of Commerce, as well as the U.S. Trade Representative, to assess these issues. Together, this group is known as the Committee for the Assessment of Foreign Participation in the United States Telecommunications Sector. And because that's a mouthful, we usually just call it the committee. In the past, when we have referred an issue to the committee, it results in the party before the commission receiving a long list of questions. Though they may vary depending on the nature of the foreign ownership at issue, responding to them always takes time. To speed up this process and make it more fair, today we are adopting a set of standard questions for this review. We are posting them on our website so parties before the agency can prepare in advance. This does not mean that the committee's assessment is any less meticulous or exhaustive. But standardizing upfront the basic national security and law enforcement questions like this is the right thing to do. It will help us clear the way for those connections that make us stronger because they help us share our democratic values with the rest of the world, while making sure we can root out those applications that may not be in our national security interest. I want to thank our government partners that are a part of the committee for working with us to improve this process. I also want to thank Denise Coca, Kate Collins, Kim Cook, Francis Gutierrez, Jocelyn Jazeri, Leah Kim, David Kresh, and Arnold Leckman, along with Adrienne McNeil, Tom Sullivan, and Troy Tanner from the International Bureau, Pam Arlick, Daniel Kahn, Melissa Kirkle, and Jody May from the Wireline Competition Bureau, Doug Klein, David Konskal, Joel Rabinowitz, and Bill Richardson from the Office of General Counsel, Christopher Clark, Barbara Kreisman, Evan Morris, Dave Roberts, and Al Schuldiner from the Media Bureau, Jeff Goldthorpe and Deb Jordan from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, and Maura McGowan and Sanford Williams from the Office of Communications Business Opportunities. We will proceed now to a vote on the item. Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
And the chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, we are getting there. Please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Madam Chairwoman, Commissioners, the final item today, entitled Protecting Consumers from SIM Swap and Port Out, will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. And once again, Chris Monteith, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Again, Ms. Monteith, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. The Wireline Competition Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration a further notice of proposed rulemaking on subscriber identity module, or SIM, swapping and port-out fraud. This item, if adopted, would propose amendments to the Commission's rules to protect consumers from two methods bad actors use to take control of consumers' cell phone accounts and wreak havoc on their financial and digital lives without ever gaining physical control of the consumer's phone. My huge thanks to the Bureau team for their hard work on this item, as well as to our colleagues in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs, Enforcement, Public Safety and Homeland Security, and Wireless Telecommunications Bureaus, and to the Offices of Economics and Analytics and General Counsel for their review and helpful input. Melissa Kirkle, Deputy Chief in the Wireline Competition Bureau's Competition Policy Division, will now present the item. Melissa?
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. This notice of proposed rulemaking focuses on ending two methods that bad actors use to take control of consumers' cell phone accounts without ever gaining physical control of a consumer's phone. In the first type of scam, known as SIM swapping, a bad actor convinces a victim's wireless carrier to transfer the victim's service from the victim's cell phone to a cell phone in the bad actor's possession. In the second method, known as port-out fraud, the bad actor, posing as the victim, opens an account with a carrier other than the victim's carrier. The bad actor then arranges for the victim's phone number to be transferred or ported out to the account with the new carrier controlled by the bad actor. The Commission has received numerous complaints from consumers who have suffered significant distress, inconvenience, and financial harm as a result of SIM swapping and port-out fraud. This notice, if adopted, would take aim at these scams with the goal of foreclosing the opportunistic ways in which bad actors take over consumers' cell phone accounts. Section 222 of the Communications Act of 1934, as amended, and our Customer Proprietary Network Information Rules, or CP&I rules, govern the use, disclosure, and protection of sensitive customer information to which a telecommunications carrier has access, and require carriers to take reasonable measures to discover and protect against attempts to gain unauthorized access to customers' private information. Our local number portability, or LNP, rules govern the porting of telephone numbers from one carrier to another. If adopted, this notice would first propose to amend the CP&I rules to require carriers to adopt secure methods of authenticating a customer before redirecting a customer's phone number to a new device. Second, this notice would propose to require wireless carriers to develop procedures for responding to failed authentication attempts. Third, this notice would propose to require providers to immediately notify customers whenever a SIM change or port request is made on customers' accounts. Fourth, this notice would propose to require all wireless providers, including resellers, to offer customers the option to place a port freeze on their account at no cost to the customer to help deter port-out fraud. Fifth, this notice would propose to codify the types of information carriers must use to validate simple wireless-to-wireless port requests based on the current wireless industry agreement, telephone number, account number, and zip code, plus a passcode field if it's been customer initiated, and would also seek comment on any additional fields of customer-provided information the Commission should require for validation of wireless-to-wireless ports to minimize port-out fraud, while at the same time ensuring the continued rapid execution of port-out requests. Finally, the notice, if adopted, would also seek comment on other ways to protect consumers from SIM swapping and port-out fraud. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now hear comments from the bench. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. As we heard here, when a bad actor is able to gain access to your phone through these fraudulent behaviors, the damage is limitless. And the FCC has received hundreds of complaints each year from victims of these practices who have suffered not just significant distress and inconvenience, but in many cases, it leads to financial harm. And I think these attacks have been made easier recently by the series of data breaches that we've had over the years. So for these reasons, I'm glad that we're taking this step to determine how the FCC and service providers can minimize or hopefully eliminate the harms that come with this type of activity. So thanks to the chair for bringing this forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. You may not know exactly how SIM swapping works, but you have probably heard about its harmful results. In 2019, hackers used a SIM swap to take control of Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey's singular Twitter handle, Jack. In just 20 minutes, the hacker sent out 24 tweets and retweets to his millions of followers, including many of them very toxic messages. For Mr. Dorsey and his followers, the security breach caused alarm and offense. For other victims, there have been even more devastating consequences, from drained bank account balances to lost email accounts containing years' worth of communications. SIM swapping and port out fraud, a related scam, occur when, as we heard, that bad actor successfully poses as the victim in a transaction with the victim's phone company. The scammer can then take control of the customer proprietary network information associated with the victim's account, leverage that control to access those bank records, other personal and private information, and then impersonate the victim in other harmful ways. These attacks are especially insidious because they're difficult for individuals, even those with security resources, to prevent on their own. And so protecting consumers from these kinds of scams will require systemic changes. And so I'm pleased to support this NPRM because it starts that process of modernizing our CP&I, local number portability rules, to require carriers to act. I also, in particular, thank my colleagues for agreeing to 2 changes that I wanted to see reflected and believe will make this NPRM even stronger and better. First, we've asked commenters to address the possibility of what I'll call future-proofing our guidelines for authenticating user identities by incorporating the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that's NIST, their digital identity guidelines, or some other authoritative source. As our authentication technology improves and adapts to new threats, we want our rules to keep up. And second, we will seek comment on whether and how the Commission should audit compliance with any carrier obligations we decide to adopt. There's good reason to think that consumer complaints alone might not be able to surface reliably problems like improper authentication procedures by a carrier. And after all, a consumer who calls her wireless company and gets the assistance she hoped for could be forgiven for not noticing if the customer service representative skipped steps in that authentication process and she doesn't know about it. And so I look forward to robust comments on these issues and the many other important questions raised in this NPRM. Thank you, of course, to the staff for their hard work on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Starks, and thank you for your contributions to this rulemaking. Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. I'd like to express my appreciation to the staff. As one might guess, this is an extraordinarily deep technical item, and I must admit, it took a great deal of study for me to be able to parse it. So thank you very much. No further comments.
Thank you, commissioners, and thank you, Commissioner Symington, for your candor. And I too am in awe of the staff and its work on this. We download so much of our daily lives into our mobile devices. Those devices are in our palms, our pockets, purses. They are with us always. They provide us with connections 1 million times more powerful than what was available on Apollo 11. Pretty incredible. It also makes them a terrific target for fraud. And as we've heard, one of the most dangerous new scams is called SIM swapping fraud. So let's take it down to basics. SIM cards are small plastic chips about the size of a dime that are inserted in a mobile phone to identify and authenticate the subscriber. And SIM cards are increasingly at the center of scams involving our mobile devices. Here's how it works. A fraudster calls up your wireless provider and convinces the customer service representative that they are you and need your phone number switched to a new SIM card that they control. These cyber crooks don't need your phone to do this. They simply need to convince your carrier to make a change to your account. And when they do, they can use your phone number to divert your incoming messages and easily complete the kind of 2-factor authentication checks that financial institutions and social media companies use. That means they can take over your email and they can drain your bank accounts. And by all accounts, including a big recent Princeton University study, this type of fraud is growing. At the FCC, we've seen complaints from consumers who have suffered distress, inconvenience, and financial harm because of SIM swapping fraud. To make matters worse, recent carrier data breaches that have made headlines may have exposed the very kind of customer information that could make it a whole lot easier to pull off these kinds of attacks. As Senator Ron Wyden has said, consumers are at the mercy of wireless carriers when it comes to being protected against SIM swaps. He's right. But we have tools at this agency we can use so consumers are better protected and their devices are more secure. In fact, we have rules on the books designed to prevent your carrier from sharing personal and private information. And those rules govern how carriers are supposed to protect what is known under the law as customer proprietary network information, or CPNI. But these rules need an update to address new types of fraud like SIM swapping. And that's what we start here today. We propose to update our CPNI and related local number portability rules to require carriers to securely authenticate a customer before transferring a phone number to a new device or carrier. And we seek comments on the best way to do that. We also propose that carriers immediately notify customers whenever a SIM change or port request has been made. These proposals will help protect consumers from both SIM swaps and a related kind of fraud known as port-out fraud, where fraudsters pose as their victims and then arrange to transfer the victim's phone number to a new account that they control. It's really important that we do this now. The Princeton University study I just mentioned found that 4 out of 5 SIM swapping attempts in the United States are successful. We can help fix this. And I look forward to the record that develops and putting an end to this cyber fraud. For their efforts to protect consumers and their privacy, thank you goes to Pam Arlick, Brian Cruikshank, Justin Falk, Lisa Hone, Dan Kahn, Melissa Kirkle, Chris Monteith, and Christy Schumann of the Wireline Competition Bureau, Ed Bartholomew, Zach Champ, Aaron Garza, Elliot Greenwald, Kurt Schroeder, Mark Stone, Patrick Weber, and Kimberly Wild of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, Ken Carlberg, Lisa Folks, Jeff Goldthorpe, Deb Jordan, Lauren Kravitz, Nikki McGinnis, Zenji Nakahawa, Erica Olson, and Austin Randazzo of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Michael Epstein, James Graves, Philip Rosario, Kimberly Taylor, Christy Thompson, and Shana Yates of the Enforcement Bureau, Mark Azek, Patrick Brogan, Eugene Kiselev, Eric Ralph, and Emily Talaga of the Office of Economics and Analytics, and Doug Klein, Rick Mallon, Linda Oliver, and Bill Richardson of the Office of General Counsel. And with that, we will proceed to a vote on our last item today. Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
The chair votes aye, and the item is adopted with editorial privileges. Would any of my colleagues like to make announcements at this time? I will go one by one, starting with you, Commissioner Carr, with your finger up right there.
I couldn't get the virtual button to work, so I'm just going to do the analog way.
Subtle. I got it. I see you.
One quick announcement, our intern this fall season, I think it's fall, is Adam Chan. He is a 3L at Columbia, and so he's joining us remotely from Upper West Side. That is one upside of some of the remote work that we're doing, is the ability to pull in interns from different geographic locations. He did his undergrad work at University of Chicago, which is an institution that the former chairman Ajit Pai went to. So Adam had a lot of work to do to try to rehab the esteem and standing of that institution. And I think he's done a decent job of that. We'll see. He is very interested in the intersection of national security law and economic regulation. And his experience shows that he spent this past summer at Kirkland Ellis in their international trade and national security practice here in DC. He spent a previous summer at the DOJ and their national security division. And he is an inaugural student fellow in Columbia's National Security Law Program. So he's certainly, raising the bar and the average when it comes to the Carr office. So it's really good to have him here. On the personal side, he likes to spend the free time that he has playing board games, exploring new restaurants, and he's an avid science fiction reader. So being stuck in New York for the pandemic has probably put a crimp on those collective board game gatherings, on exploring new restaurants. But on the bright side, it's left him some additional time for all that science fiction reading. We're really happy to have him join us this fall, and we've already had him jump in on the national security item that we voted on this month, and look forward to more productivity. Thanks.
All right, Commissioner Starks, anything to note today?
Yes, I too am pleased to welcome a new class of interns to my office. For indeed this fall semester, we have a class of 3Ls all around. The first is James Elizondo from George Washington University. The second is Brittany Gambrell from Howard University School of Law, and she is our early career staff diversity initiative intern for the semester. and then Haley Laws from the University of Minnesota. So welcome. I look forward to all of your continued hard work in my office this semester and appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Symington, any announcements today?
Thank you. None at this time.
All right. Thank you, commissioners. And before we adjourn, I've got a couple of brief ones. First, I just want to point out two really dynamic individuals at the Federal Communications Commission who will be moving up and on to new responsibilities, and that's Sanford Williams, who will be taking on the role as Deputy Managing Director of the agency, and Joy Ragsdale, who will be stepping into the role of running the Office of Communications Business Opportunities. We're very excited to see what good things both of them will do. I also want to announce this year's Excellence in Engineering and Excellence in Economic Analysis Awards. All right, we're going to start with the 2021 Excellence in Economic Analysis Award, and it goes to Martha Stansel of the Office of Economics and Analytics for her work on designing, as well as conducting, monitoring, and reviewing the bidding in several auctions of mid-band spectrum licenses that are suitable for 5G technologies, and also her work on an auction to award universal service support for fixed broadband service in underserved areas. Congratulations, Martha. Second, this year's Excellence in Engineering Award is shared by Julia Tu and Ryan Hedgepeth from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. They did really outstanding work on the Commission's technical investigation into the nationwide outage of a major wireless network. Their efforts are going to help ensure that rapid, efficient, nationwide radio communication service is available to all people of the United States, just as our statute compels us to do. Their work on this project is going to help inform the agency's continuing work to avoid outages like this in the future. Congratulations, Julia and Ryan. And now I want to acknowledge some departures from the Commission. First, Steve Garner retired from the Media Bureau at the end of August after 28 years of service to the agency as an analyst. He started working at the FCC in June 1993. He was assigned to what was then the Consumer Protection Competition Division in the Cable Services Bureau, and that's now known as the Policy Division of the Media Bureau. Throughout the years, Steve furthered the mission of the Commission and has been an integral part of our policy division team, from being the point person for automating and tracking Commission proceedings to tracking and assembling workload reports for the division, managing division records, and handling the release of orders. Steve was a huge asset to the Media Bureau and Policy Division, and he will be missed. We wish him only good things in retirement. Second, Chris Killian has retired from the agency after 19 years at the FCC. He joined the agency as senior counsel in the Office of General Counsel. He later served as Deputy Associate General Counsel, overseeing the Administrative Law Division. In 2011, Chris brought his considerable talents to the Enforcement Bureau, ultimately serving as Deputy Chief of the Bureau. And in the Enforcement Bureau, Chris supervised a really diverse array of projects that range from an investigation into one company's collection of payload data from Wi-Fi networks to consent decrees with inter-exchange carriers for all kinds of rural call completion problems. And overseeing the Markets Dispute Resolution Division, Chris took the lead in a number of very successful mediations, most notably those involving data roaming complaints brought by the largest wireless carriers. Beyond those individual matters, Chris also spearheaded a rulemaking that combined several sets of procedural rules governing formal complaints into a single unified set. He is going to be sorely missed by his colleagues, and we wish him well as he moves on. Third, our chief economist, Glenn Warwick, is returning to his post in academia, and we want to thank him for his outstanding work and insights over the past year. Glenn came to us from the University of California at Berkeley, where he taught microeconomics, industrial organization, and econometrics for the nearly 25 years. And for most of that time, Glenn was also the executive director of the Center for Research on Telecommunications Policy at Berkeley. His contributions during his time at FCC really run the gamut. For example, he worked on our efforts on Open RAN, the Emergency Connectivity Fund, rural healthcare, transactions before the agency, and more. We wish him all the best in his return to the West Coast and to Berkeley. Finally, and unfortunately, we are going to end on a somber note. It is with great sadness that I want to acknowledge the passing of our former FCC colleague, Bob Ratcliffe. His name probably sounds familiar to a lot of FCC staff because he worked at the FCC for nearly 4 decades and retired in 2014. He served in a variety of positions across several bureaus, including 10 years as acting chief of the Enforcement Bureau, acting chief of the Media Bureau, which he took the helm of during the final phases of the digital television transition. Not easy. And he also served as an interim media advisor to former FCC chairman Alfred Sykes. The commission honored him with a Lifetime Achievement Award back in 2012. He was widely respected both inside and outside the agency for his deep and broad knowledge of mass media law. Bob brought a sharp insight to bear on a wide range of challenging and sensitive matters, like I mentioned, the digital television transition, but also broadcast ownership and indecency. His willingness to mentor and counsel so many who work at the agency endeared him to nearly all of us at the commission. His generosity in sharing his time and expertise enabled a lot of people to build the confidence and skills needed to reach their goals and excel in their work. His imprint on the work of the commission will be long lasting, and so we collectively offer our deep condolences to Bob's wife, Michelle, and his sons, Michael and John. And with that, Madam Secretary, please announce the next meeting of the Federal Communications Commission.
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Tuesday, October 26, 2021.
Until then, we stand adjourned.